A war 1,000 kilometres away might seem like something that only affects geopolitics or the oil markets, but what if it actually exposes something much bigger about Australia's economic model? For decades, Australia's relied on a very simple formula for prosperity. We dig resources out of the ground, sell them to the world, import much of what we consume. But geopolitical shocks like the escalating conflict involving Iran reminds us just how interconnected our economy really is. Oil prices spike, supply chains wobble, inflation rises, interest rates may stay higher for longer, and suddenly events in the Middle East over there can ripple through Australian households, businesses, and even our property markets. So today I'm joined by leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher to unpack what this conflict means for Australia's economic future as well as our housing markets, because it isn't just about Iran, it's about the strengths and vulnerabilities of Australia's economic model. So welcome to this week's Demographics Decoded podcast, the show that unveils the trends shaping our future. I'm Michael Yardley, and each week I'm joined by leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, and together we dig beneath the data to uncover the trends that are shaping our economies, our community, and our future prosperity, and what that means for your business, for your investments, and your future prosperity. Of course, our aim is to make sense of what's coming up next so that you can make smarter decisions for your business, your investments, and your life. And Simon, boy, are there some changes happening in the world at the moment.
Yeah, they really are. And this was, of course, the underlying reason why I wrote this column about how the Iran war might impact Australia, mostly because I wanted an excuse to think about this and actually make sense of all of this stuff that keeps happening, because it is well and truly an overwhelming amount of information and change that is coming at us. And so I tried to in a very systematic way, work my way through what this might actually mean for us. So it's a very Australia-centric look at the Iran war. We don't want to take away from any kind of human suffering that is occurring over there, but we want to understand this just from our simplistic, isolated perspective.
Okay, I think that sets the context for it. So we're talking about a column you recently wrote in the New Daily, and I'll leave a link to it in the show notes if people want to read it. But you have brought it back to what really happens in Australia. And let's go back to the concept that you've spoken about on many occasions on this podcast, the four pillars around which Australia's economy is currently built, Simon.
Yeah, exactly. And those four pillars are the four economic forces that drive prosperity in this country. This is how the Australian economy makes money. Obviously, we are a mining nation. This is the vast majority of our exports are mining related. We are a global food producer at scale. We are considered a global food superpower, so it's agriculture. And then there's also the entertainment, the tourism sector, where we entertain the growing global middle class, people that are rich enough to consume at a global level. And we are also a provider of educational services. We provide international degrees at a nice big price, and that's how we make money. We don't.
Well, historically, it's been very successful, Simon, hasn't it? And moving forward, despite the challenges, I think the world is going to continue to need raw materials, food, and yes, holidays and educational degrees, won't it?
Exactly. And this is part of the long-going argument that I have, is that those four pillars do not make us a very complex economy. It makes us a very uncomplex economy if you look at all those global complexity rankings. But it makes us a very resilient economy, because ultimately those four things aren't going anywhere. So food production, that will definitely be in demand. As long as we grow economies, as long as we grow the total global population, why would mining products go out of fashion? We also urbanize the world. So anything that has to do with steel goes through the roof nonstop. And of course, people want to be entertained, that's tourism, and they want to be educated, or they want to educate their kids, and they know that English remains the lingua franca in the in the education system, in the global economies. English speaking degrees will go at a premium, and that's what we have to offer. So all of these bad news that we might consider, all of these negative impacts on the Australian economy, we need to take this into context, that we are still very, very safely buffeted from all those negative consequences compared to what other economies are facing. And some of the developments in Iran might actually, to a certain degree, work in our favor.
Which ones would they be?
Well, this would largely be we are an exporter of energy and of food, and the prices for those products should go up. So the Strait of Hormuz, which is, of course, the geographical area that the whole conflict evolves around, you have so many oil and gas flows of the world going through the Strait of Hormuz. And now that this is, for all intents and purposes, locked off, that means less product is on the market, and a scarcity drives up prices. Our shipping lanes remain open, and so we can continue to send our LNG, our liquefied natural gas, to the world. Also, if there is less oil, we burn a bit more coal. We are a coal exporter. That should drive up coal prices. Also, that's energy costs go up. Then, of course, a surprising amount of the world's fertilizer gets traded through the Strait of Hormuz. That, of
Yes,
course,
I read
means
that.
that of course means that this is scarcity, so that ultimately drives up food prices. It's also annoying for food producers in Australia because they still need fertilizers, and they overwhelmingly are imported in from overseas. But overall, the end product that you push out as an agricultural sector in Australia, they will go at a premium. From an Australian national perspective, this is a good news story. From a global perspective, where we will see food prices escalate and the bottom 2 billion people of this planet suffer for it, this isn't a good news story. This is quite a catastrophic development. But from our isolated perspective, these are things that work in our favor.
Well, that won't all work in our favour because there's the concern about oil prices, oil shortages, petrol shortages, and only recently the National Australia Bank has come out and suggested inflation could jump to 5% because of this.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm not an economist, so I can't tell you by how much inflation will increase, but it's absolutely certain that it will increase because you cannot run our economy without burning some amount of fuel. And as long as those fuel prices go up, we just need to spend more money to do the same stuff, and that's inflationary. And so inflation is absolutely guaranteed. So please, from a property perspective, in particular, if you're an investor or if you have a mortgage, don't think that your mortgage repayments are going to go down. That makes no sense to me. They should go up. So the idea of rate cuts, I think that's off the table for quite a while. I think we're facing rate rises potentially if you want to keep inflation in check again. So that, of course, isn't a good news development whatsoever. And of course, whatever business you run, you will be impacted by higher fuel prices. Transport costs go up, so that means all kinds of product prices will go up. So the general inflation is guaranteed.
So, Simon, in your article in the New Daily, I was interested to see how you broke it down into a different way of looking at this geopolitical problem. You broke it into 4 quadrants about our mind, about our behavior, about our culture and our systems. Can you work us through your thinking here?
Yeah, absolutely. So try to create this integral worldview where we show from different perspectives how the war is impacting us. We already spoke about what we would consider the systems, the structures, the exterior. So these are the hard, boring economic facts. We talked about rising oil and gas prices. We know that shipping gets more expensive because you need to ship around the Strait of Hormuz. Insurance for shipping probably goes absolutely insane.
Yeah.
So freight costs definitely go up. And we import all of our fun consumables in Australia. We import from overseas, so we would expect that these costs will go up rather than down. From an air travel perspective, you of course have lots of air corridors now closed. That means just air traffic that puts tourists from Europe in particular or the Middle East into Australia, that is much more complicated. So it means we have fewer seats traveling our way. That means these seats become more expensive. And so that is probably not in favor of our tourism sector. We might get more Asians that don't make the trip to Europe. Maybe this kind of evens out, but we'll definitely miss out on the European tourism euro, if you will. And we already hinted at inflation going up. So that is quite problematic, to be honest. So there are quite a few negative things coming our way, and that's just what we need to suck up, so to speak, as an economy. I would remain optimistic about international education. I don't think that student numbers should go down, because even if I'm a European student, um, ultimately, if I go here for 4 years for a degree, I will still make the trip. The trip will just be more expensive than I hoped for, but I think I don't change my life plans around that dramatically. So I wouldn't expect international education to be impacted all that um, badly, if you will. Um, yeah, and then of course we do need to talk about the how this might change our individual behavior, because we always say, well, how do those effects around the world, how do they impact us as individuals? And so, well, if you think about higher petrol prices, well, we still need to fill up our cars, we still need to live our lives. That's the inflation narrative that we talked about. Yeah? And so the Reserve Bank looks at this and they must be so frustrated,
Yeah.
constantly being pushed to cut rates, and now they go, well, how long can we hold off raising them? That's annoying. I think that Australians will probably cut their European travels short, or they'll skip them and they go to alternative destinations. So that's probably in favor of Bali and New Zealand and nearby Asia. I think that's benefiting them. Um, as investors, financially speaking, anything that smells like energy looks very, very promising at the moment. Um, because what else could we do? Well, I think we would probably go to the secure bet of property yet again. I think that's always what Australians gravitate to in times of crisis. You go to property. So that's probably going to be helpful. And of course, there's this big divide within Australia where we talked about this in the past, that we talk about this U-shaped economy with a shrinking middle class and big lower and big upper classes in Australia. And the poorer households will most certainly be hit harder as prices keep escalating. That'll be a very uncomfortable tightening of the belt, even in a prosperous country that isn't in any direct way hit by this war in terms of, having bombs go our way or anything like this. So that's bad news. And I think this kind of uncertainty, just to drive one more speculative narrative in here, is probably better news for the smaller parties than the big parties. Because in times of uncertainty, we feel, whether rightly or wrongly, we feel that the system isn't doing us any favors as individuals. And so then I'm more likely to make a protest vote. So if I'm Pauline Hanson, I'm not looking at this too sadly, this kind of development.
Interesting. There's also the psychology behind it, the invisible thing, how we feel about things. We're going to hesitate. We're going to put off decisions. A lot of Australians are going to wait for a level of certainty, a level of comfort.
Most certainly, it will increase some sort of individual and collective anxiety, because the future, and my job is forecasting. I well and truly know that forecasting is becoming even harder now, that there is all those geopolitical movements happening. And I think you feel this as an individual. You just don't even know what's happening. And this is coming on top of climate change, on top of AI, and all of those things that are big uncertainties when we look at the future. That is confusing. So I do think we ultimately look at the world where we are less secure about our jobs, about our incomes. We can't even safely say what our lives might look like in 10 years or so. And so that's difficult. As travelers, we'll hesitate. We will change our travel plans. We might hold off on overseas travel, which could benefit local tourism or local spending. It's also a good way of cutting household spending if things are tightening. Yeah, but so that's difficult. And I would, of course, urge all those Australians that do feel very anxious at the moment, and rightly so, that there is at least the comforting truth that we are far away from these negative movements. So maybe there is hope or there's a feeling of safety, of security in this physical distance between us and those negative um, um, developments. But to be honest, people well and truly feel that we live in this interconnected world, and those psychological impacts, they still might weigh heavier than the actual economic impacts that you might have.
Now, it's probably worth just expanding on one of the things we discussed a little bit, Simon, the fact that oil prices, the average consumer sees it at the petrol bowser, and we know that petrol prices have gone up, and there's even some talk about rationing. There's a flow-on effect, isn't there, into transport costs, which adds to manufacturing costs. A lot of things are manufactured with that way, food prices and inflation. Oil prices are much more than just the price at the bowser.
Oh, absolutely. So it's about the global, it's or not the global, the national interconnected impact of oil prices that we are really concerned about. Yes, it is it's kind of sucks if your tank costs $20 more than it did a couple of days ago. That is truly annoying, and it adds up because you need to fuel up your car more than once. And so that is truly annoying. But the real difficulties is that all of those trucks that truck everything around the country, they need to be fueled up as well. This is an energy cost overall, and energy is in absolutely anything we do implicated. And so, yes, it just does become more expensive.
Now, I've never really fully understood this because I know we have LNG fields and oil fields, but we actually don't refine it here. Is that correct? We actually import much of our refined fuel.
Exactly. It is confusing. So we are an importer of fuels, but we're an exporter of gas, of coal. We're not an oil exporter. So that's we still in net terms, we are an energy exporter. So we export much more. When you translate energy into primary energy, we export much more than we import, than we use. So ultimately, you could argue that escalating energy costs, assuming we collect enough revenue from this, enough taxes, royalties from it, and we actually do get a net benefit as an economy. The idea then is, of course, the question is, do those net benefits for the economy trickle down to the average Australian consumer? And people that are more cynical, people that are less cynical than I, all agree that they probably don't do trickle down accordingly, that this is ultimately the benefits are more skewed towards the top than the bottom.
Now, we've called Australia the lucky country, and people have wanted to keep coming here. We've spoken a lot about this show about immigration. And by the way, if you're a new viewer or listener to this show and you haven't subscribed yet to Demographics Decoded, please, wherever you're listening to this or watching this, click the follow button so the algorithm keeps giving you our weekly shows where Simon and I discuss the demographic trends shaping the future. Today's a little bit different. We're not talking about the long-term trends that demographics is a crystal ball of and helps us to help you plan your future business or investment decisions. We talk about something more short-term. It's obviously relevant at the moment, but why not subscribe to the show? By the way, if you'd like to catch up with Simon and me and a faculty of tax, property, finance experts, why not join us at Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast at the end of May? I'll leave a link in the show notes. It's the 20th anniversary of Wealth Retreat, where a small group of already successful business people and entrepreneurs spend an immersive 5 days looking at their future, planning their future. They come in with a whole lot of ideas, but go out with strict plans. It's much, much more than the property event. So go to wealthretreat.com.au, find out about it and express your interest, and we'd love to have you join us. We've got to talk with you first to make sure it will suit you. And understanding the demographics is an important part of property and business planning, and that's why Simon is the keynote speaker. But Simon, I've got sidetracked a bit because I was going to ask you about our lucky country, and I think all this is going to make us even more desirable for immigration, isn't it?
Well, I think overall that should be the case. And this, of course, where we talk about the cultural impacts of the Iran war and about the national myths and narratives that we tell ourselves about ourselves. So ultimately, you'd think about, does this shift towards the negative? But you could argue. So you could say, well, if we talk more about defense spending and about potentially shaky alliances with the US, what does this mean in terms of how safe do we feel in the world? What does it mean in terms of looking for opportunities elsewhere? Do we then become a bit more open-minded in talking about this? Who knows? Yeah, it could, at worst, it could lead to social conflict. It could lead to the idea that social cohesion within Australia is threatened. What we've seen with the war in Gaza, for example. This is a thing that is not impacting Australia in any real direct way whatsoever. But you have different factions in Australia telling different stories about the war, and then they create conflict within Australia. Even though whatever way Australia would shift in a conflict, the conflict itself would be impacted at least or at best minimally. And so that's the risk, is that we import problems from overseas into our country without having any real chance or hope of impacting this thing for the better. But overall, I think energy security might well become a much more strict cultural and political talking point. And that's interesting. So which way would this lead? So if we're more concerned about energy, well, I think one way could be, well, we export gas. And so we should definitely charge more money, more taxes, more royalties for our exports in this world that really needs those.
Yes.
And this is when we open up all the narratives that have been very, very strong on the left side of economics. This is when we talk about the Australia Institute talks about this. We talk about Punter's politics for the Gen Zs of this country, and we talk about even Gary's economics in the UK talks about these kind of shifts quite dramatically. And I think this might actually take hold, because the narrative of just charging more money for our Australian resources, that works on the left and on the right. So this could almost be a political unifier, which could be a positive story. But it also could just lead to more investments in renewable energies, because if we import expensive fuels, we go like, boy, if all of those cars would be driving electrically, that would be much safer. We would be buffeted a bit better for this. So we'll see how this shifts there. And of course, we might see, remains to be seen, if there are small niches of the society where we might shift towards hoarding behavior, where we might fear that prices escalate in the future, and then we see toilet paper 2.0 again, where we hoard some sort of product. Who knows? And this scarcity mindset, of course, isn't helpful for an economy. We want to feel that the need for an economy, or the opportunity for an economy to push forward. And a scarcity mindset would take away from this. How will this impact discussions about migration? That's another really big topic. Who knows? Should we support the US? Should we remove ourselves from the US? What should we do if the war in Iran creates more and more refugee flows? What's our role in the mix? These are unsolved cultural, social issues, and I fear at worst that this leads to more social division, but at worst it leads us to a good introspection about our role in the world, and we then are a bit clearer in what we can offer and what we demand from the world in return.
Well, many of our listeners and viewers are investors, and in particular property investors. If you're an investor in the share market, you know how volatile the share market is. On the other hand, for property investors, when we hear about headlines about wars and geopolitical instability, I know they also tend to panic a bit. But historically, markets have absorbed geopolitical shocks fairly quickly. So if you're a share investor or a property investor, I'd recommend you think long term, because markets adapt. The long-term fundamentals matter more. So avoid reacting emotionally. Don't make 30-year investment decisions on the last 30 minutes of news. Yes, markets often initially react to geopolitical shocks, but then life goes on. With regard to property, the fundamentals are still sound. Sure, interest rates may rise a little bit, but we've got a large population which is continuously growing, not supplying sufficient dwellings for this growing population. Vacancy rates are extremely low. And yes, in the short term, people are going to put off their buying and selling decisions. But if you're in the position that you've got a secure income and your finance ready, for me, this creates a window of opportunity when there isn't going to be as much competition for you to move up, buy a new home or buy an investment property. And when we look back, just like the other big shocks over the past decades, it'll be interesting retrospectively, but you'll think, gee, I'm lucky I got in when others stood on the sidelines. That's the old Warren Buffett saying, isn't it? Be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. But Simon, a lot of our listeners and viewers are also business people? Is there a message you'd like to give them?
I think the sense of optimism. Don't lose the sense of optimism. And I'm, of course, talking to the converted here already, because you are only in business if you have some sort of optimism about the future, about your ability to impact the future in a positive way. So I'd say, don't stop believing in the Australian business model. This is a good, successful corner of the globe. And I do think that those storms will eventually pass, those geopolitical storms. But of course, they might take longer. And again, as you said, Michael, you're completely right in terms of looking at the long term. And demographically speaking, this wasn't a very demographic episode of Demographics Decoded. Demographically speaking, many things highly favor Australia in the future. And so keep this in the back of your mind.
Now, Simon, you do a lot of consulting for business and give talks for business. People may be wondering, our new viewers and listeners may be wondering, what does a demographer do?
I do that. I look at big trends that impact Australia, and the demographic element is the most common data that I look at because it is the most easily predictable macro data trend that we have. And then, of course, I look at anything from geopolitics to economics to figure out what all of this means. And I try to then create narratives at a presentation if I'm presenting, in consulting reports if I'm consulting, what this might mean for a business or an audience in question. They do this all day, every day.
Sure. If you want to get in contact with Simon to see how he can work with your company, your organization, your institution, I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. And my team at Metropole help our clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth. We're much more than the buyer's agent. We give you strategic property and wealth advice. We're your strategic partner. Property is the vehicle, but strategies that drive it to help you outperform the markets. And as I said a few moments ago, for those who are finance ready and securely financial and employed, then this may be a good opportunity, but you've got to do it strategically. Have a chat with one of the wealth strategists at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes, and have a complimentary wealth discovery chat with one of our strategists to see what you can do to help you secure your financial future. Now, Simon, I think this is going to keep unraveling. Everyone was hoping the war would finish quickly. It's probably going to take a lot longer than Donald Trump and Netanyahu and everyone else hoped. And we hope that the damage to the Middle East and the people there, we have not talked about that, and not because we don't recognize the importance of it. It's, as you said at the beginning, we're talking about an Australian perspective, but yes, it is a terrible thing. Any war is. But the events there may initially have seemed distant, but I think what you've shown us is they have surprisingly powerful effects on our economy, on interest rates, on oil prices, on inflation, on supply chains. But I hope our viewers and listeners will remember it's important to look at the big picture. Australia's economic model has served us well, and increasingly well, for decades. Like any model, it's got its strengths and its vulnerabilities, but understanding how those dynamics help us make better long-term investment decisions and avoid being detracted by the short-term headlines, I think is important, because in the end, successful investors don't react emotionally to global events. They understand the systems they're operating in, and they position themselves accordingly. So, Simon, next week we'll get back to more a demographic discussion. But thank you for your insights in what's going on today. The story's not going to go away quickly.
No, it won't. We'll be talking about this, I think, in terms of side storylines for quite a while.
Speak to you next week. Thanks, Simon.
See you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these demographics decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.